Beverly Enos, and you're watching Spotlight Georgetown. You can find us Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, and oftentimes other times, on your local cable TV station. So this is your station. If you'd like to use some of the equipment, let us know. If you'd like to be on the station and on the show, please let me know. If you'd like to volunteer your almost best friend to be on the show, please let me know that as well. Now today we're talking to Tom Barabee, who is the new assessor, and we're talking about the assessments and the Board of Assessors and what goes on here in Georgetown. So, welcome. Have fun.
Thank you.
Where are you from? You should know.
Well, I've been in Georgetown for almost 30 years now.
Is it that long?
It is, yeah.
Wow.
It seems like it was only a month ago that
And you have family here?
Well, my wife and I are still here, but the kids are pretty well
They're
moved
all
out of
long
town.
gone.
Well, A, they can't afford to live here, and B,
well.
they would prefer to live closer to the city where they work.
Okay.
With the exception of one son who lives up in Amesbury because he's working in Ipswich.
Okay, yeah, they've all grown up and gone. Mine too.
They do come back though.
Yeah,
Not permanently, but
yeah,
we do see them occasionally on weekends.
yeah. Mine are both in New Hampshire, so they kind of move where they can afford.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what is the path that is followed to become an assessor? What's the education, experience? How do you become an assessor?
Well, in my case, it was through a fairly long process. I originally served on the Board of Assessors with your dad, as a matter of fact, back in the late 80s. That was my introduction to the process of assessing property. It was somewhat eye-opening in that there's a lot of technical work that takes place behind the scenes.
That people have no idea.
Right, that people aren't aware of. You know, I think in a lot of cases people assume that we arbitrarily assign a dollar value to their house.
Well, your house is worth this, and
Right.
your house is worth that.
And I'm sure maybe there was a time when people did do that and were able to get away with it, but in recent history that is just not possible. Everything we do is overseen very scrupulously by the Department of Revenue. We have to get value certified every year. Back to your question as to you know, the process of becoming an assessor. It's a varied skill set that's required to become an assessor. You need to be a diplomat. You need to have
A thick skin.
Yeah, you need to have a thick skin. You need to be able to get around town to get to know the properties. You need to be willing to go out and inspect properties when they sell or when somebody has a building permit where they're going to do some work. Because one of the critical components of what we do is we need to have an accurate inventory of each house in town. And when I say accurate, I mean down to the number of bedrooms, bathrooms, the type of siding on the house, and
Kind of floors.
what kind of flooring they have, the type of heating system, because we want to be able to adjust the value of that house according to what amenities and conditioning quality of that particular house may carry. So it requires a great deal of analytical skill as well. There's a lot of number crunching involved, although we have a computer system that does a lot of that, but we have to figure out what numbers to put into the model in order to let the computer do its work, because it's not intelligent, it's not intuitive. It'll only give you the result that you allow it to give you, given the data that you put into it.
Right.
So in my case, I was on the Board of Assessors. I served a term on the Board of Selectmen. My kids were young. I had 3 kids under the age of 6, and that took me away from the town limelight for quite a while. And then about 10 years or so ago, I got interested again with the kids moving out, and I was elected again to the Board of Assessors. So I served for going on 10 years again on the Board of Assessors, during which time we had brought on a fairly inexperienced assessor, and he required a lot of basically education and assistance to be able to accomplish his job every year. And so I mean, more through happenstance than anything else, I ended up taking all the courses that he took and got the same certification. So I became a certified assessor, but not with the intent that I was actually going to become an assessor. And then quite surprisingly, several months ago, he suddenly decided to leave and go work someplace else, and that left a void. Given the amount of time I have invested in the situation, developing it to where it is now, I felt compelled to, at least on a temporary basis, to step in and stabilize, you know, the transition. And it turns out after some thought, it's a good fit for me right now. It's a fairly short commute.
You walk down Andover Street, and
Yeah.
here you are.
Unfortunately, since I've been in the position, it's either been too hot or raining.
Yeah.
For me, I haven't been able to walk down here once. So I had to resign my position on the board and wait 30 days before I was qualified, or actually before the board was able to consider me for appointment to the position. And, you know, in the couple of months that I've been doing it, it's challenged pretty much my entire skill set, you know, in terms of my analytical skills. I came in at a time when we had to adjust values for the new tax year that we're in now, which is fiscal year 2017. And so that was the first real major order of business, was to
Yeah,
enter.
when you come in the May, June, July time, or the May, June time, everything starts again July 1st, and all of a sudden, everything's gotta be redone.
Right. I mean,
That's
on the
when you
upside,
arrive.
it's the same cycle every year. On the downside, if you come in the middle of it, you know, it's a bit of a challenge. And plus, there was a 5-week vacancy, you know, where nobody was doing anything. So the schedule that we had worked very hard to achieve, to be ahead of the curve a little bit, to make sure that we were certified in time to get the tax bills out. We sort of lost that this year, but, you know,
But you
happy to say we're
You
back.
got them out, didn't you?
Well, that was the preliminary bill. You know, we're still working on
Yeah.
what we need to do to get the actual tax bills out. And that won't happen until December, but there's a lot that needs to take place between now and then, town meeting being one of them.
Thank you very much.
Yes, as you well know.
Yes, I do.
Until we know how much money we're actually authorized to spend, which town meeting is the only entity that can authorize the expenditure of any
And
money,
You won't get the
which is
cherry
another.
sheets for a while.
Another thing that people, I think, don't quite appreciate, that, you know, we as town employees, elected or appointed, we can't spend a nickel unless people at town meeting have authorized us to do so.
Right.
And
Town meeting
so-
is much more important than most people realize.
It is. I mean, you know, we're lucky that we have an opportunity to experience the purest form of democracy, where, you know, you or I or any other person in town who wants to register to vote, they can go to town meeting, they can stand up and they can express their opinion on any given subject that's under consideration. It doesn't get any more pure than that.
Thank you for the soapbox. I don't have to get on it.
Oh, well.
It
I
is
mean, that's a
very
key
true.
component of what we do. People think that we have some control over what their tax bill ultimately is, but we don't. All we're doing is valuing the property, and then we're doing the math to figure out what the taxes are going to be to cover whatever town meeting authorizes the town to spend, so.
And I'm going to do a little bit of perspective here. I had my house reevaluated at one point in time. And
By the assessors or an appraiser?
by the assessors, somebody came out from the office. This is a few years ago.
Okay.
And literally took a tape measure, measured the house, measured every inch of the house from the outside, and came in and said, okay, hardwood floors, this is the length of the house, this is how many bedrooms, this is the kind of floors, this is the kind of doors, this is the kind of, everything in the house gets looked at. Every inch gets looked at. It's not something that somebody just looks at the house from the outside and says, oh, okay, that's what it is.
Right.
And I don't think people realize it took at least an hour and a half to 2 hours for that person to come in and take all the notes and decide what information had to be taken to then take it back and put it into the computer to make a decision on what the house should be valued at.
Right. Well, you know, again, that's one of the key ingredients as to what we do, is we have to have a good inventory. And that's the inventory that I was talking about. We need to know how big the house is, because we base the value to a degree on the square footages, the square foot prices that we determine from the actual sales of properties for like houses. We apply that to all the other houses that didn't sell to come to some idea as to what it should be worth. And in order to do that, we need to know exactly what's there. Obviously, somebody's going to pay more for a house that has a better quality construction, or better windows, or a better flooring, hardwood flooring as opposed to carpeting, or, you know, any other amenity for that matter. So it's important for us to know all that.
And things like when you have a stairway, the top step, is that big enough to be called a porch? Or is it not? Is a laundry room considered a room? Or is it a closet with a washing machine in it? Those are the types of things that make a difference that people, I don't think they realize.
Well, you know, we look at it just like buyers look at it. You know, when people are
Yeah.
shopping for a house,
Right.
those are the things they're looking at. Does it have enough bedrooms for us to either fit our existing family or grow into it? If it has 2 bedrooms and you need a 3-bedroom, then obviously you're not gonna pay maybe anything for it, but you're certainly not gonna pay as much as you would for a 3-bedroom over a 2-bedroom.
Right.
You know, style of house is a big determining factor for people. Over the last 30 years in Georgetown, almost every house that's been built has been a colonial. Every subdivision that you drive down today is a colonial
Right.
construction typically.
Very few ranches.
And that's contrary to what it used to be in the 50s and 60s, which were ranches, and then capes were very popular styles of houses back in those days. And nobody wanted to move into those because they typically had small rooms, a cape more so even than a ranch. But a ranch typically doesn't have a basement, which to some people
Right.
is very important.
Is it a crawl space or is it an attic?
Again, you know, if people are looking for storage or expansion capabilities, that's another thing they'd look at.
Okay, so what is the exact process from the very beginning of, let's say, from your perspective?
Okay, so if we had hypothetically a brand-new town, had never been assessed before, we would walk in and we would do this inventory. We would have to, and we're required to do this every 9 years, by the way, where we have to go out into the community.
Every house in the town?
Every house in town has to be inspected. And I would ask anybody watching here to bear with us, because when we ask to come in and inspect your house, we're not trying to be intrusive. In some cases, it's uncomfortable for us to do that.
Can we come in and look at your
But we really need
house?
to do it. It's required that we have a certain percentage of actual inside inspections that have been completed in order for us to comply with a data quality study. So, first thing we do is we go out and inventory all the houses in town. If we had to do that all in one shot, which the town had to do back in 2007, I believe, it's about a $40,000 proposition to hire a company to come in and do that. The quality of what you get there is not necessarily what you get by having somebody internally do it, because obviously I want the best quality data that I can get, because that's gonna make my job easier going forward. I'm not gonna have a lot of mistakes or oversights that I'm gonna have to correct going forward. I'm not gonna have a lot of people coming in and saying, hey, I do have this or I don't have that. So it's important, you know, as a stakeholder to make sure that the data is accurate. So once that's done, now you have to look at the sales now for the existing fiscal year, which we're in 2017. It started at July 1st. We're gonna have an actual tax bill coming out hopefully in December, and that's gonna reflect what we found the market did for the 12 months prior to January 1st of this year. So we're looking at the sales that took place between January 1st of 2015 and December 30th of 2015. And then we capture that data, we analyze it, and we look at what are the sale prices versus what we have it assessed at. And what we're finding, well, what we found up until that point was that the market was fairly stable. We were lucky over the years of the collapse that we did see a slight decline in property values here, but we more saw just a decline in the number of houses that sold,
Okay,
as opposed to
The values.
the bottom falling out of the values. So they did decline a little bit, but they've rebounded and they stabilized for both last year and the year before. At the after January 1st, we've started to see a steady increase in prices versus their assessed values.
so the values.
What's that saying? Is
So the sale values are increasing.
correct. So people are paying a lot more for houses. And the other dynamic that I've noticed is that where everybody wants to live in a colonial, not everybody can afford to. If a colonial is selling for $700,000, not everybody can afford a $700,000 house, but they still want to move to Georgetown, so they will go buy a cape that's much lower priced and still be able to live in Georgetown. But what's happened is now everybody at that end of the market is paying more and more and more. So we're seeing people coming in and paying $150,000 more than the appraised value or the assessed value on capes, and ranches are now showing the same effect.
So a colonial in Georgetown is selling for $700,000.
Well, I mean, I use that as an arbitrary number,
Okay.
but they are at the high end of the
So
top end of the
they're
market.
at the high end of the market.
But with that said, you know, they're typically the best quality because, again, if you drive down any of the recent subdivisions, you're gonna see that they have really nice windows.
And they're
trim.
usually 4 bedrooms.
And they're large, they have a lot of square footage, they're probably twice the square footage of a Cape, in many cases. Because a
Okay.
Cape is a 1.5-story building, and a colonial is typically a 2.5-story building, so there's a lot more to it, and consequently, the price of them is also higher.
So to come into Georgetown, people are paying more than the assessed value of a Cape just to be in Georgetown.
Right.
Or more than the assessed value of a ranch just to be in Georgetown.
Right,
Because they want to be in Georgetown
right.
for whatever reasons.
For a variety of reasons. In
Right.
many cases, it's the schools. In other cases, it's convenience of, we're located pretty close to the highway.
We've got
for
95,
commuting.
we've got 495.
Right. I mean,
With-
when people didn't want to commute more than a half hour, we were not an option for them.
Right.
But now, when an hour and a half is a doable commute for a lot of people,
I mean,
we're looking a lot better.
People can commute to Maine as fast as they can commute to Boston.
Right. I just drove in there Monday for a couple of hearings, and
Yeah.
it was an adventure.
So in this market now that we have,
Mhm.
what type of property has seen a decrease in Georgetown? Or has there been?
There really hasn't.
No.
I mean, the only property that I had to adjust downward, and it was only slightly, and it was only because I only had a couple of sales that I was reacting to instead of a large data set, were bungalows, which are tiny houses. 600 square foot, 700 square foot houses, under 1,000 square feet. Tiny houses that families, that it's not a practical house for a family.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I did have
A
to.
lot of the smaller houses around the lakes and the ponds and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Although, that said, although they used to be bungalows, a lot of people have added second floors, and they've expanded them
Yeah. Now
in
they're
any direction they
basements
could.
and,
Yeah, dug out the basements and,
Yeah. Been
so,
there, done that, lived in those.
right. So, we've seen a big change in the inventory in town here. It's interesting to me because Georgetown's history is of a farming community and then a resort community, and so we have that type of,
We've been there.
established housing,
Yeah.
but then all of a sudden we became what we are now, which is the bedroom community, suburban community instead of a rural community. So we have, at the top end of the scale, we have these, very, very extravagant houses that people have built in recent years. So, there's a very wide disparity where you go to many towns, if you were to go to Western or someplace like that, you wouldn't see some of the types of houses that we actually have in
Yeah.
Georgetown here.
Yeah, we do have quite a,
There's a range. We have everything.
Big
We
range.
do, yeah.
now, if I get my tax bill and I don't think that my house is assessed for what you say it's assessed for, what do I do?
The
Other
first-
than, grind my teeth.
Well, you can save that for later, because you can always do that. I would suggest that anybody who has a question about their tax bill, they should call us, and if you think you're overassessed, there are a couple things you can do. You
So
can,
the first thing is to call
yeah,
and talk to somebody.
Right.
Don't grind your teeth, talk to somebody.
exactly.
Okay.
Believe it or not,
Conversation is a good thing.
believe it or not, I, like most town employees, am not here to make anybody's life difficult. I'm trying to be as fair as I possibly can, because honestly, if I underassess a piece of property, that is not fair to every other taxpayer in town, because they have to pick up that extra burden. Conversely, if I overassess somebody, that puts an undue burden on them. So I want to be as fair and accurate as I can. And the cornerstone of that is this data quality that we talk about. So the first thing I would ask people to do is to call us, and let's review the data that we have. Do we have the dimensions of your house correct, and the style, and all those other things?
Is that the assessor's field card that we're talking about?
Exactly, all right? And that's available online.
Okay.
People can actually go look
So
at
every
it.
house has an assessor's field card?
Right. And
How big it is,
It
how-
includes a picture, it includes a sketch, it includes what we call a ladder on the side, which tells what style of house it is, what grade, meaning the quality, how many bedrooms, and that's where all of that.
Is it a
that
finished
detail.
basement or an unfinished basement?
Right.
Does it have a garage? All those
Right.
types of things.
Right. It has a separate line on the front of the card for the land value, because we value land and improvements separately.
So the land value is one thing and the house value is a
Right.
separate
The
thing?
front of the card on the bottom has the land calculation, and then the back of the card has all of the data for the improvements, and then those two are combined on the front of the card again and added together to get you the.
And the land
the
value is the
assessment.
same for every place in Georgetown,
Well,
pretty much?
not really, no.
Really?
No,
How come?
well, because people pay more for big lots than they do for small lots. In some cases, if you buy a small lot, you pay the same as somebody who got a bigger lot, but you got a lot, and that's what people want. Again, if people wanna move to Georgetown, they're not gonna typically
So it's
pay
not
an
X
extra.
number of dollars per square foot.
Well, that's how we end up calculating it, but we have to do a very thorough study, you know, what we call a land residual study, where we take all the sales and then we deduct all of the improvement value, leaving the value of the land, and then we have to array them according to the size of the lot, so that we can calculate, okay, a 40,000 square foot lot sells for $4.11 a square foot. However, if it's a 35,000 square foot lot, it probably sold for the same amount of money as the 40,000 square foot lot in aggregate, which means that the square footage price is higher.
But it's still a lot. It's still a buildable
It's
lot.
still a buildable lot,
Okay.
right.
So buildable lot is a buildable lot, so there's a little bit of
Yeah, I
adjustment.
mean, obviously, you know, we have 3 residential zoning districts here. The A is a 15,000 square foot minimum lot, and there are a lot of them. And then there's the B district, which is a 1 acre lot, and there are a lot of those too. And then there's the C district, which are 2 acre lots.
2 acre lots.
We don't have as many of those, but, you know, the square footage prices on all of those 3 zoning districts is different.
And question for you, a lot of the 2 acre zoning lots, a lot of it's wetlands.
Yeah.
So does that come into play that it might not be the same value because it's not buildable?
Yeah, what it does is it puts us in a position where we have to make adjustments
You have to adjust it.
each individual lot, and it's a case-by-case basis.
Okay, so it does get adjusted for things like that.
We would make an adjustment potentially for topography, because it's really steep, wetlands, you know, different access,
Okay.
you know, there are a variety of things.
So if
And
you
we have a
put a lot-
scale that we try to use to be fair about it, so that if somebody has a 2 acre lot and they can only use 1 acre of it, but they have the 2 acres to comply with,
So if it meets the zoning, but you
With
can only
zoning.
use an acre of it, there's gonna be an adjustment.
yeah.
Okay,
Or, you know, somebody might have a house, let's say, backs up against the golf course, and the golf course has an easement across the back of their property. You might make an adjustment for the fact that somebody has an easement, you know.
next question. How often are easements done, assessments done? Never mind easements, here we go. How often are assessments done?
Every year, basically.
Okay,
So we adjust values every year, we're required to, every 3 years, and that looks like it's changing to every 5 years because we're so good at it, I guess, I don't know.
okay,
But every year we make adjustments to the values based upon those 12 months of sales that we look at. This year, I had to adjust the values of several different styles of houses. Capes, I had to raise them considerably because they're a hot item in the market right now. Conventionals, which is it's a cape with a low slope roof, basically. It's you know, an older style house.
it
It's
changed.
another hot item in the market.
Okay.
So the square footage prices on those went up fairly significantly, where colonials went up, but not as much percentage-wise.
Big question. How much of the town budget comes from property taxes?
About 55%, a little more than half.
Where does the rest of the budget come from? Cherry sheets?
Yeah, most of it comes from the state in the form of chapter monies, you know, might be chapter 90 for chapter 90 for roads and chapter 70 for schools.
Okay.
So a significant amount of that revenue.
We've
comes
got
from there.
industrial, commercial,
Mhm.
and personal property,
And residential
and residential. So we've got 4 different types of
classes.
classes.
Yeah.
What's the ratio?
Um,
I mean, we have a lot of industrial zoning along the highway, but not a lot of it is actually built upon. Some.
Yeah, you know, this has been a discussion recently about, you know, we want to try and grow the tax base. Because right now, you know, taxpayers are basically paying for the entire 55% of the budget
Right.
out of the residential tax class. The breakdown for the classes is residential is about 92% of the total,
Okay,
and commercial.
out of the 55,
Yeah,
okay,
all right. Well, I'm just talking about the value.
okay,
And yes, you could make a case, if you did the math, it would be the same thing, that
Right.
of and I don't have the exact number.
All right.
But we're looking at probably, I don't know, $17 million for the levy that this year that's gonna come from property taxes.
Okay,
Of that, about 92% is gonna be the residential, and then about 4% is gonna be commercial, 4% is gonna be industrial. One of the things that's happened in town here over the years, and, you know, not so much recently, but I remember 20 years ago, at town meeting, they rezoned some of the industrial corridor along Route 95 back to residential because a developer came in and wanted to build houses. Well,
yep,
all well and good, but now when you want to grow your tax base and draw some industry in here, you need to have a place to put them, and we have, you know, shrunk. We didn't have that much to begin with. I mean, the 95 corridor
And
does exist, but it wasn't
apartments.
that huge. And apartments. I mean, we were lucky to get that apartment complex on
We
Long
were.
Hill, to be honest with you, because it, not only did it add a huge amount to the
It-
tax base,
changed our 40B.
it also complied us with low-income housing,
Right.
so that helped a lot.
That helped
Yeah.
a huge amount.
Yeah.
But,
And it's worked out pretty well. I don't know of anybody that really complains about it.
no, it's worked out wonderfully,
Yeah.
yeah.
And particularly with the access road, I think, going out to 133 by 95, it's, you know, the traffic impact has been minimal. It's probably a little bit there, but, you know, it hasn't been drastic.
So, putting this all together, there's a lot more to it than most people realize.
Mhm.
And if people have questions on their tax bill, the first thing that they want to do is come down and talk to you.
Right? Yes. I mean, I would,
Conversations are easy.
they're easy, they're very easy. And I mean, if they're not satisfied after the conversation, they have a couple of remedies, one of which is they can file for an abatement, which goes before the three-member elected board, and they decide, you know, if they're going to reduce the value of the property, and they would, you know,
Right.
the homeowner, if that happened, would get a refund of whatever portion that was abated. If they're not satisfied with the answer that they got at that level, they could appeal it to the appellate tax board in Boston. And if they're not happy with that, they can go to the Supreme Judicial Court. All of which gets a little bit more expensive as you go through that process, but,
For the homeowner.
right. But, you know, I don't want to go there and argue these cases. I want to be as fair and equitable as I can be with people, and so if there's a reasonable case that's made, if we made a mistake on the measurement of the houses, or if we made a mistake on a particular amenity that they may or may not have had, we're more than happy to correct it.
And I think a lot of times for the homeowner, once they understand the process, it makes a big difference. And the other thing, when you just made that statement, it's an elected board of assessors.
Right,
So they're elected by the public.
right,
So they're not connected to anything other than the people that elect them.
right.
So if you don't like what's happening, you have a choice of going to an elected board. It's not somebody that's tied into anything else.
Right. And, you know, property assessments have very little to do with how much money gets spent.
Right,
It only factors into how much money you collect from each property owner
Right.
to cover the money that is spent. So, and again, that money is only authorized by the people that go to town meeting, which sadly in many cases is, you know, woefully inadequate in terms of how many people actually go there. Sometimes you're sitting there and you have to make phone calls to get 100 people to come down and authorize $13 million worth of spending, which is somewhat ludicrous, but, you know, I would like to think that people would recognize that it's important for them to go
and
and participate.
sometimes you can go through the budget in 7.5 minutes, and it takes 25 minutes to talk about a skateboard park.
True. Well, and you know, I think, my sense is that one of the reasons that, you know, many people don't go to town meeting is because they have a lot of confidence in the fact that we have a finance and advisory board that, and a town administrator that spend countless hours, you know, trying to figure out how we're gonna do all the things we need to do with the little resources that we have.
That was going to be my next comment. The reason that it's 7.5 minutes to go through our budget is because of the months and months and hours and hours and hours. Our finance committee is absolutely, and Mike,
Yeah.
absolutely amazing. What they can do with the small amount of money that they get is just amazing.
It's interesting, I was sitting in a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and the comment came up about, you know, how we're able to do what we do with as little resources we have. The State Department of Revenue came in here at one point, not too long ago, and they sort of, you know, did an audit of everything that we have going on here. When they were done, they were basically scratching their head, and they were they were dumbfounded at the fact that and they even came out and said this, we don't know how you are able to do everything you do with as little as you have.
Mhm.
You know, part of that is we have a lot of people who volunteer their time, and, you know, are willing to contribute their expertise to figure things out. But
And on that note, we're going to end. We have an amazing town. Thank you very much.
you're welcome.
Good to see you. I'm Beverly Enos. This is Spotlight Georgetown. Don't forget, watch us again. And our amazing town.